Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Shawnee. I'm here today with Kevin and Billy, and we are associate business consultants at the Widener Small Business Development Center, and we're here to discuss market research from a marketing perspective, a financial perspective, and a business strategy perspective. When small business owners think of market research, the first thing that usually comes to mind is their customers and needs, their customer needs and their customer preferences. But there's several layers to market research, and using information from primary and secondary research, you can actually evaluate your business from a marketing perspective and a financial perspective to create business strategies that will help you get a holistic view of your entire operation so that you can ultimately determine if your business is going to be feasible or is feasible. So Billy, from the marketing perspective, why is market research important?
Yeah, so from a marketing perspective, what the first thing that I'm going to look at is I'm really going to look at currently what's going on in society. What are some social trends going on? So everyone's always using the word millennials, and what are the millennials up to today? So they kind of are big trendsetters these days, and kind of from a marketing perspective, knowing what consumers want and what your buyers want is kind of a big thing. So you kind of want to look at what trends are going on in the environment, and in addition to that, I kind of really want to know what kind of market exists out there. I'm sure any entrepreneur getting started has an idea of what their product is and kind of an idea of who their consumer is, who's going to be buying their product or service. So you got to really know from a marketing perspective what that market looks like, what's the market size, what are the characteristics of those buyers, and kind of what are you capable of getting into there and getting people to want to buy your product. So kind of an overarching question for a marketer is kind of just that, those simple questions of who's going to buy my product, what market size is out there, and really what's trending right now and what's going on that is going to add value to my product that the customers are going to want.
So, Kevin, from the financial perspective, why is market research important?
So when you're looking at it from a financial perspective, really what you're worried about is the profitability of the business, and so you're doing a lot of what Billy talked about. Actually, you're looking for trends. So you're looking for historical data that goes back maybe 5 or 6 years, just as a starting point, and how far you go back really depends on the industry and things like that. And you're looking to see what the conditions were. So what were some macroeconomic trends that were happening that maybe affected the revenues for your business or the revenues for your industry or the cost for your industry or things like that. So you're trying to paint a picture essentially of what was going on, and this is how it impacted my industry. And then from there you can make predictions. So once you have that past picture, you can make predictions to say, okay, if this happens, I know it has this effect on my industry's revenue, so it would have this effect on my revenues. And but really, so when you're looking at it from a financial perspective, what you're trying to figure out is how profitable is my business going to be. If it's not, I've said this before, if it's not a profitable business, it's just an expensive hobby. So really what you're trying to figure out is, can I make money? Is based on the future macroeconomic trends I'm predicting, do I believe that my revenues are gonna be higher than my costs? And that's honestly all it boils down to is, am I going to be making more money than I'm spending? And if so, I have a profitable business. I have a business I want to start, and that's sort of what I'm looking for. And so Billy talked about doing some consumer trends and figuring out, is there a market for these things? And that's a big part of it too. And when you're doing financial research, you need to consider those aspects too, because and you said it to start off, you need a holistic approach. It's a lot of times I think people at home, or they're probably looking at it from, okay, I'm just worried about the marketing, or I'm just worried about the strategy, or just worried about the financials. But really, you need to look at it from every single perspective, and you need to be able to change your perspective. And that's sort of one of the hopes I think that people take away from this today is that I need to put myself in Kevin's shoes and say, how would Kevin look at this? And then, or I need to put myself in Billy's shoes and say, how would Billy look at this? So, you really need to get that holistic approach to understand, for me at least, is my business going to be profitable?
Yeah, and that's very important to really kind of understand that, is that marketing and market research is not just one thing. It is a broad category of many different types. So the viewers and the entrepreneurs really need to understand that you're going to be doing research on multiple different things, and it's not just one thing. So they got to keep that in mind.
Yeah. And while evaluating the small business from the marketing perspective and the financial perspective, it's a nice way to actually see your entire operation. Oftentimes, entrepreneurs, they get stuck thinking about their business through one lens, but having these multiple perspectives will help them to really get the complete picture, not just one picture. So how would you say, Billy, should entrepreneurs look at their business from a marketing perspective to determine if the industry is something that they want to get into?
Yeah, so one thing that a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs, they kind of forget is that they kind of just look at it at a micro level, like what is their business and who directly they're going to be selling it to. But they never really take a step back first and say, let me look at the industry and let me do research on the industry. And that's very important too. So there's a nice framework that we see a lot of times, and it talks about doing an industry analysis and what you really need to understand before getting into the industry. And it relates back to the profitability, but from a marketing aspect, you need to understand those things too. So from, we'll call it a macro level. From a macro level, a marketer is really going to focus on a key few things there. Let's first start with, as I stated, the industry trends. So the industry trends is just what's going on in the industry right now, and what are the buying behaviors of those customers, and the messaging that you might have to do along those ways. So you're really looking at the trends, but with the trends, you also have to understand that trends do fade, and you need to understand, is this trend sustainable? Is this going to be a thing that carries along way into the future, or is it just going to be something that's very popular? So like a great example of that is a couple years ago, a lot of ice cream shops started getting into frozen yogurt because that was kind of a thing. People thought it was a healthy alternative, so a lot of these ice cream shops really turned into frozen yogurt shops. And today we can kind of see that trend kind of faded away a little bit, and it's not as popular today. So all those businesses that jumped on that board and got into the frozen yogurt business, while there's still some of them still exist, it's not very popular today because it was kind of just a trend. Other things that you might want to look at is your buyer, who your buyers are and the demographics. What's their characteristics? You should have an idea of who your consumers are. And from a marketing perspective, your customers are very important, and you need to understand what they value and how you can add value to that. So understanding who your buyers are and really understanding what they want and what you can provide to them is very important. So you have to understand those buyers, and you want to kind of understand like what power those buyers have. So can you set a price, and will they buy it? So they could say, you could set a price that you think they should be buying at, but if your product is similar to something else that's in the market, they can decide, I'm going to go buy a product similar to it somewhere else. So they'd have a high buying power, and it's kind of important to understand that. So really kind of understanding who your buyers are. Some other things you might want to consider at macro level as a marketer is your competition. So you really need to understand who is competing in this industry already. A lot of entrepreneurs, one thing they might think is that they have a brand new product and the product doesn't exist in the market, and that's why they're going to be successful. But I'm sure there's other people competing in the industry that you're trying to do, and even if it's not a direct competitor, there's probably something else that can get the job done. So you really have to look at your competitors, and by looking at your competitors, you can really find out what they're doing, what things are they doing that's successful, what are they doing that's not successful, or where can you differentiate yourself from them. So that's going to be very important to really understand. And if there's a lot of people competing in your space, you know that it's going to be a little more difficult for you. But that just shows that there is a market. So if there's already people competing in that market, you know that your goal as a marketer is to get in, differentiate yourself, and kind of take market share from there. And by offering value to customers that they want or that they can't get from another competitor. So really doing an analysis on your competition, and you can do that from a national, global standpoint, but if you're going to be a small business, look right in your backyard. Who's your local competition? And that's going to be very important for you too. And lastly, one thing that many people don't really think about, and I had touched upon this earlier, is what substitutes are there for your product. So a lot of people might not think that their product, there might be something else that can get the job done that's different than the product, but that kind of is competition. So if you think about it, for a lot of these restaurants and different things like that, like one thing they might not think about is their competitors might be the restaurant down the street or the mom and pop restaurant right down the street, but they never really think that I'm also competing with a grocery store that sells food. So that's kind of a thing that maybe entrepreneurs want to think about is where else can my buyers go and get a similar type of product.
And that's all depending on what need the product or service is offering and what other products are out there that can fulfill that same need. So I like that you pointed that out. Kevin, from the financial perspective, how would a small business owner figure out if the industry is one that they should get into?
Yeah. So before we really get into the actual financial, what specific information I'm looking for, I sort of want to touch on something that I think is an important note. So when you're looking at, you're doing market research from these different perspectives, you're not doing 3 sets of research. You're really doing one, and you're finding the facts, but you're sort of applying it with a different lens. So Billy and I might look at the same piece of information, and I could come to a financial conclusion about it, and Billy could come to a marketing conclusion about it. So you're not doing this research in isolation, essentially. So you're doing one giant thing of research. You're getting as many facts as possible, but then you're applying these lenses to it. And so what I'm trying to figure out, if I want to get into an industry, financially what I'm looking for are the margins in that industry. And all margins are is just the difference between the money you're going to bring in and the money you have to spend to make your product, to sell your product. And so you're looking for these trends that we've talked about a lot. Is are the margins going to increase based on macroeconomic conditions, based on your local supply and demand, things like that? Are these margins going to be increasing or decreasing over the next couple of years? Specifically, what you want to do is you want to look for sales. So what traditionally has been the required amount of sales to run your business in a profitable manner. You're also looking for costs, and when you're talking about costs, what you need to consider is who are your suppliers, where are you getting your products, or if you're a service industry, like what's the labor market like where you are? Is it possible to actually run this business profitably if I have to pay $1 million to get my raw materials, or I have to pay my labor $40 an hour because it's so highly skilled? These are the kind of things you're trying to consider. And from a financial perspective, I'm just going to walk away if I don't think I can make the margins that I need to make. I'm willing to just say, you know what, whatever. And the truth is when you go to a bank or a loan officer or someone, they're going to be looking at it similar to that perspective. They can buy into your mission statement, they can believe your intentions are good, but at the end of the day, if you can't give them the return on investment that they're looking for, they're just not going to give you money. And so that's why you need to be equally, if not more critical of your business than they will be, starting with the financial piece of it. And another thing you want to keep in mind is if the industry is profitable, Billy touched on it a little bit, people are going to try and imitate what you want to do. So it's going to bring more competitors, more business into this industry, which is going to affect the supply and demand of costs and revenues and market share. So you need to consider that in a dynamic sense. So when you're looking at sales, you say, this industry, like, the margins are super high. In a couple years, I know I could think of maybe like 3 or 4 businesses joining this thing, and they're going to take away from my market share. They're going to take away from my sales. You need to be aware of that and consider how that's actually going to impact your profitability as you go forward. But yeah, so like I was saying, you're not doing financial research specifically. You're just trying to find all of the facts, and there are a lot of facts to gather. But once you find your good list of whatever, you're applying this financial lens to it to sort of say, is my business going to be profitable? What are the margins I'm going to make? And a practical application of that is, can I get money from a bank because I was the first person to figure this out and put it in a nice, presentable report to a loan officer?
Yeah, and I just kind of want to touch upon what Kevin said. So, a really good way to look at this is from a marketing perspective and from a financial perspective. We're looking at 2 different things, but 2 very important things. So Kevin kept using the word margins. So that's from a financial perspective. You're going to look at that. What are your margins and what's your profitability? From a marketing perspective, I'm all about the market share and thinking a lot. I want as many people buying my product as possible. So they're both 2 different strategies, but they're both very important. So a small business owner should understand the difference between, do I want a lot of market share at lower margins or anything like that? So like they kind of play in together, because I can sell my product at low margins for a lower cost and get so many more people to buy it, or I can kind of differentiate myself, say I'm gonna play in this little niche market. I'm okay with less people buying it, but if my margins are higher, I know that I'm gonna pay off there. And feel free to ask any questions if you have questions. We're live and we can answer any of those questions.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, Billy. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion. I know we're using some fancy words, but we are live, so you can definitely type in some questions and we will be able to answer those for you. So the whole point of this is to use market research to get a 360 view of the business operation. And in looking at the business from a financial perspective and a marketing perspective, the small business owner can actually come up with business strategies to address some of the issues that are happening, if there are issues that are occurring in the particular industry, or basically address some of the opportunities within the industry. So let's do financial perspective. How can a small business owner figure out how they fit within the industry?
So from a financial perspective, it's actually not as financially based as you might think. When you're looking at where you're going to fit within the industry, what you want to be looking for is, what's my competitive advantage? What do I do that my competitors don't necessarily do? And you're talking about strategy, and that's sort of it. You're looking for, what is my strategy going to be? Because ultimately, so I sometimes think about it as, what's the value of my company? What is the ultimate size? What would someone pay for 1% of my company? What's its total value? And the competitive advantage plays so heavily into that. So you start by doing this macro research of saying, this is what the industry is doing. But when you boil it down to the micro level of, what is my company doing, your numbers can be totally different depending on what your competitive advantage is. If you're the low cost competitor, everything you're doing is cutting costs. So your margins might be significantly larger than the other people in the industry, and that's something you need to be aware of. Ultimately, the question I'm trying to answer is, what is my overall value and what is my growth potential. Growth potential is a important metric for any small businesses, especially if you're like Shark Tank or something.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going on Shark Tank, they're gonna be wondering, what kind of growth have you seen and what kind of growth are you projecting, because all of that boils down to how much am I actually willing to invest in your business. And that goes back to when you apply for a loan, when you go to a bank, they're going to want to know, am I going to be able to make my return on investment? So that's something to be aware of. And also, when you're making decisions about what you want to do, if you see someone in the industry doing something that's really profitable or working really well for them, is it easy to imitate? Is that something that you could do? I said in the last segment, if you find this industry that's really profitable, people are going to try and imitate it. You could be one of those imitators. You could come in. You don't have to be the first mover. You don't have to have the first mover advantage.
There's also first mover disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. You can run into issues where there's not a market for it. You thought it was going to be this awesome idea, but it doesn't work out. But so when you're deciding your financial strategy of, what are my pricing options and how am I going to get my raw materials for cheaper and things like that, these are all things that you need to be considering. And ultimately it's going to play into the final lens that you're looking at it to is, what's my size? How much is my company worth at the end of the day?
Absolutely. And in figuring out the business strategy, essentially the business can either pursue cost advantage or a differentiation advantage. Differentiation really simply means that you're doing either something completely different or just something slightly different from those that already exist in your market, so that you can compete within that market and be a little more profitable than those that already exist. And what Kevin was mentioning in the value chain, if you're a low-cost competitor, everything in your value chain needs to be lowering your cost, your labor, your materials. Every activity within that value chain has to be lowering your cost. And if you're a differentiator, you're within your value chain, something or a few things within the value chain has to be unique to your business operation. So, Billy, from the marketing perspective, how can the small business owner figure out how do they fit within the industry?
Yeah, so from a micro level, that's what we're talking about right now is how am I going to fit? It's really your business focus rather than the macro level where we're kind of looking at everyone else in the industry. You really got to take a second and look at yourself. And the one thing we call it in marketing is there's 4 P's of marketing, and that's the product, the price, the place, and the promotion. So that's what you're kind of evaluating for your business. So most people are going to start with the first P of product. So they really need to understand what their product is and what value proposition they have to their customers. How is their product valuable? So Shoni, when you were talking about differentiation, if my product adds value, I'm going to be increasing the willingness to pay. So they're willing to pay more, kind of how Apple does with their iPhones. People are willing to pay more for it because they're different than what's out there. Or you could be the company that's like Walmart. They're not increasing people's willingness to pay. They're offering it at a low cost. So that's their product that you really need to understand what value. So one end, it's people want luxury and things like that. At the other end, people want something for a good bargain. And that's kind of what you're understanding is what value is your product and really understanding it. Because if you don't know what product you have or what service you have and what value it has to the consumers, you're not going to be successful. So you really have to understand your product and what it can really do for the customers. After that, you also want to look at the price that you're paying. So kind of going right off of that, are you pricing your product high or are you pricing it low? And what are your margins on that, and what are your people's willingness to buy that? So that's very important to really understand is you don't want to outprice yourself, or a lot of people could mess up because they'll they price themselves wrong. So really understand what you can sell your product for is very important to understand, and you're going to have to evaluate that at the micro level, is what price you're at and where you really believe that you can sell your product for. So going on to the next P is the place, and this talks about your distribution. So where are you actually going to distribute your product? And place could be such a broad thing. So here you're looking at physical location. What geography are you selling this in? Are you local? Will you sell this globally? Will you sell it nationally? Those different things all matter. So you really have to understand where you're selling your product. And a lot of small businesses might start local and just kind of sell things locally, and that's okay. Another thing to understand is that place also refers to the location. So not location, but where. So in today's world, the web exists, and a lot of places will sell things online. So you have to really understand where your buyers are going to be buying a product. So if you're targeting an elderly generation, then you might not want to sell your product online if they're not familiar with that. So if I'm selling life insurance to elderly people and I'm trying to do that online, my sales might not be great. So it's really important to align the place that you're distributing your product with those who are going to buy it. So that's kind of, are you a store, are you online, are you a mix of both? And there's different, we'll call this a segment, target segments of who you might be selling it to. Your buyers, you might sell your same product to different people, and it's okay, that's okay, but you have to understand each of those are going to have different strategies, and that you're going to have to appeal to all of them. And the last one is the promotion, and this is kind of where a lot of people really kind of think marketing is, and it's the advertising and the sales and where you're selling it. So the promotion is really talking about what messages are you going to tell your consumers. So it's really important to align your messaging as a small business owner to your customers and understand what are their values and kind of relay their values in the messaging that you're saying. So you're going to say, you should buy my product because, and appeal to their values. And if you can do that, people are more willing to buy your product. So it's really important, and it's okay, how I talked about earlier, you'll have different segments. So you might have a different message for the same product to different customers, and that's really something that as a marketer you have to really understand. If you don't know your buyers and why your buyers are buying, then you're not going to have a successful marketing campaign. I can go on Facebook and I can advertise, and if I have the wrong message out there, or I'm trying to reach the wrong customers, it's not going to work. So you really have to understand how you want to promote your product and the message, and really aligning your message with the value proposition of your company.
Yeah. Also, I just want to reiterate something for people watching that I think it's important, is this is a continual process. So even if right now your strategy is working, you need to be looking 3 to 5 years into the future to see, hey, what are the trends going to be? So Billy mentioned when he was talking about place and distribution, like elderly people you might not want to sell online to because they're not as familiar with computers. But maybe one of the trends you see in the future is they're offering classes at skilled nursing facilities, or older people are reaching out to their kids or grandkids to say, hey, teach me how to use YouTube, teach me how to use Facebook. So that might be a trend that you can be aware of, and if you were doing it today, if you're marketing that way today, it wouldn't make sense, but you can start to build content and be on top of that trend, so that when it actually starts happening and when it starts to make sense to do that, you're already ahead of the game. So it's not a once and done process. I'm starting my business, I look at the industry, I say this is what's going on, blah 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 blah. You need to continually go back and be doing this environmental scan to say, what's going to happen in 3 years that I want to start preparing for today. And I think that's something that's important to remember about market research, it's a continual process.
Absolutely. I am so glad that you pointed that out. Market research is not a one and done kind of deal. It is the business world change, products change, and trends, they change. So you definitely have to be consistent and keep track of what is going on within your market so that you can be on top of that, so that you can develop business strategies to address those changing flavors and tastes for your customers and changing trends. In creating your business strategy, you definitely marketing perspective, business perspective, financial perspective, and that way you can align the entire organization internally, your processes and your operation, sales, marketing, operation, finance, all the little segments within an organization that it takes to actually make a business run. You can align your business strategy to address the threats and create barriers to imitation so that your company is one of those that's around for 10, 15, 20 years. And if you have a question, we are live. So if you have a question, please feel free to leave it in the comment box. We are here and ready to answer your question. We actually have a question from Dan from Springfield. He has a question about primary and secondary research. So he wanted a little bit more clarification on what exactly those are.
Sure. So in marketing, there's two. You can have, while we talked about different types of research, there's also different types in regards to what kind of data you're collecting. So are you collecting primary research, or are you collecting secondary research? So to touch upon primary research, that means that you are actually going out and doing the research yourself. And I don't mean doing the research yourself as in logging onto a computer. You're actually going out, surveying customers, and trying to figure out what they want, what voices do they want you to hear, and what's their opinion, and kind of really being out on the street and being one of those people that are out there saying, hey, if I started this type of company, what would you want to look for, and different things like that. And you're really just going out there and talking to people about it. So you're collecting the data yourself, and maybe you're looking at buying habits. So if you're a product and you're thinking about selling a new candy bar, and you want to know, should it be chocolate or like a sweet candy, maybe your primary research there is you're sitting in a grocery store, watching in the candy aisle and seeing what are people picking up more. So are they picking up the chocolate more, or are they picking up the sweet candy? So that's kind of some primary research that you can go out and find yourself. The secondary research would be more like what I was saying, where you're on the computer or you're in databases and you're kind of reading through information that people have already collected. The difference between primary research and the secondary research is that primary research can be controlled by you. So you're doing it so you know what outcome you want, or at least what outcome you're looking for. There might be data out there that has been done, and you read about the case studies and different things like that. That's all secondary research, and it'll tell you things about your market. And it's just important to understand that research or those surveys were conducted for a reason. That was someone else doing the primary research, and they're going to let the data out to everyone. But just understand that it was done for a specific reason. So while it is going to be important for you to understand, it's also important to understand that it was done for a reason.
Yeah, I think a key distinction between primary and secondary is, so with primary, you're getting information that is specific to what you need, but it's a lot more costly. It takes time to go and sit down in the supermarket and say, are they buying sweetened or unsweetened chocolate? Whereas secondary research, there's a ton of it. There's a ton of information. It may not be specific to what you're looking for, or maybe it wasn't done in the region that you're located, so the numbers might be different. But it's a lot cheaper and easier to access than actually going out and doing it yourself. So there's a trade-off there that you have to be aware of and balance.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin and Billy, thank you so much for joining me today. We are actually out of time, but this was an insightful conversation, and thank you again for joining us.